Okay, so the topic of tonight's shir is about the Shem HaMafoirash. It's about Hashem's name. Specifically, we're going to talk about two things. Number one, why is it relevant now? This week we learn in Parshas Acharei, we learn about the avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. One of the things about the avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur was that this was one of the times when he would say the Shem HaMafoirash, and everyone would hear it, as we always say in the davening on Yom Kippur. That's number one. Number two, we're in Chodesh Iyar now. And Chodesh Iyar says in Svarim, we'll talk about this later, we will circle back to this at the end, is a Rosh Tevis for Ani Hashem Reifecha, with the Yud being a reference to the Shem Havaya Yud Ke Vav Ke. And so therefore, I'm using this as an opportunity to do something that's been on my mind for the last few months, and I'd like to share it with you. So basically, the story starts like this. A few months ago, I bought in Kahas, I showed this to you in a previous class, the Kitzi Haggadah. This is a Haggadah that's one copy in the world, meaning this is a facsimile of the copy in the world, that exists in the library, the Rebbe's library. The Fitik Rebbe purchased this Haggadah. And it was in Tavshin Hey, it was taken, and then this was one of the Svarim that were brought back. It was sold for, I think, like $75,000 to a guy named Florsheim in Switzerland, and then they paid him, and then he gave the Haggadah back. So I bought the facsimile, and there's a lot to talk about over here, but one of the things that I noticed was Hashem's name, the way Hashem's name is spelled. So I'm going to quickly pass this around. If you could all just look very quickly at the way Hashem's name is spelled over here, and over here, and over here, the Yud. And you'll notice that there's an upside down Langechaf. There's an upside down Langechaf, and if you could just pass it around quickly so everyone can have a look, because we have about 5 different things to look at. There's an upside down Langechaf. You'll see with the bracha of Baruch Atah Hashem Asher Kitshanu B'Mitzvayso V'Ratza Banu. You'll see there's an upside down Langechaf in the two Yud. And like, what is this? What is going on over here? And every single time you have the Yud there, you have that thing. So it was a very, very curious thing. And I was trying to figure out what's going on. Okay, that's number one. And then I got more of these different facsimiles of Haggadahs, and I noticed that it wasn't a one-off. I wrote about this in a JLI publication, and I wrote this curiously. It has an upside-down vav. That's what I wrote under each thing. And this is the only known example if it exists. I don't know why I wrote that, but that's what I wrote. Anyway, a few weeks later, I bought this thing over here, and you open to any random page here, you see the way Hashem's name is here, and you see that it's something similar is going on. If you could just pass that around. This Haggadah is called the Washington Haggadah. Let me just give you a word about it. It's a different letter. It looks like a nun, a backwards nun or something like that is around the name of Hashem. So quickly I went to the document and I deleted it. Baruch Hashem was like a day before I went to print. I deleted that. It's not that it doesn't exist anywhere else. I realized there's something that's going on over here. And so I started looking around into this, and the truth is, as you're going to see, that this wasn't the exception. This was in fact the rule. So just for the dates, because the dates are going to be a little important, this guy is written in 1760. Okay, printing exists then, but if you're a chashva guy, you get someone to write it out for you. It's written by a scribe. It's not printed. This is 1760. This is from the 1400s. Both of them are from the world of Ashkenaz. Why is it called Washington? It's called the Washington Haggadah because the manuscripts in the Library of Congress. So the way that these things work is where the manuscript lies comes the name of the Haggadah. So it's called the Washington Haggadah. It's from the 1400s. It's written by actually a very famous scribe and artist. Actually, you look on the cover, I'm noticing now, by Hashem b'Mitzrayim v'Yiru Amas Hashem, you have here two perfect examples of this thing. And yes, it's not the same thing. It looks a little different, but yes, 300 years earlier. It's before. And then I looked at this guy. This one is a Haggadah that comes from Italy, from, I believe, the 1300s. It's called a Lombard Haggadah. And if you look over here, you'll notice that something else, not the same. Here's Hashem's name.
This is only happening in Haggadahs, right?
So, very good question. Is it only happening in Haggadahs? The answer is no, it's not only happening in Haggadahs, because we expand the search and we look in Machzerim, any handwritten Machzer from the medieval period, any handwritten Siddur from the medieval, anything that exists always has something going on. It's almost never Yud Yud. It's almost never Yud Yud. There's something else that's going on in addition to that. So here we had upside down vav, here we had a backward nun, here it was a more of a curvy type of thing. So I started thinking to myself, what is going on over here? So I came up with two theories. Two theories I came up in my head. And I wrote an email to a big one of these, this guy over here, Epstein. I wrote him an email. I said, what's going on? I never saw this before. I said, here are two possibilities. One possibility is that, when you live, especially in English, and this is true in every other language, God's name is always with a capital letter. You start G, the G is always uppercase. The Lord is uppercase L. So is it the case that Jews at a certain point felt that's what's going on? A regular Yud for Hashem's name. When in Latin, the non-Jews, they put a chashva big G. So maybe we should do the same. So if Mela by Elikim, you have a lamed that goes up. But a Yud, what is that? So maybe they added this to make it a capital letter. This is one theory came out. Turns out it's completely wrong. Number one. Number two is maybe it's an abbreviation sign. Yud at the end of the day is not a word. And indeed, one of the things we're going to talk about today is what is Yud. And I'll try to give a little clarity. We all take it for granted. As Siddur says, Yud, we know that that's Hashem's name. How does Yud mean Hashem's name? How did we even get there? So maybe, as you know, there is a thing that you put an abbreviation sign when it's not a real word to indicate that something more is going on over here. So maybe these were fancy abbreviation signs. So that, it could be, it's not a crazy idea, but it's nicht azay pashut, as we're going to see. Alright, now before we go into trying to solve the problem, all this is from Slovakia, this is from, let's say, Germany, this is from Italy. Broadly, you could say it's Ashkenaz.
He didn't respond to you?
He wrote he doesn't know, he's into the art, he doesn't know anything about the calligraphy, he has no clue. Anyway, other people have addressed this. Subsequently, I found this has been addressed, and we're going to talk about this more. Yes. So here's an example from Spain. Spain is its own unique situation over there. If you look over here, let me actually find a good page, because there are two examples. If you look over here, you'll notice here, you have a Yud on top of the Yud, and then something going on to the left of it as well. That's on this page. And on this page, just Yud. 3. Okay? So if you can just pass that around, and you can see that one. This is coming from Spain, and here again you see that the idea of having Yud, incomprehensible. There's always something else that's going on over there, and here, sometimes it's not consistent, sometimes it's a Yud on top, basically an upside down segal. Sometimes it has an additional marking under the left Yud, sometimes not, he's not so consistent. And I have another copy of a very similar Agada from Spain also, the same idea, the 3 Yud. And finally, here is the last example that we will look at. This is probably the most beautiful one of all of the samples. This one is very hectic because all of the examples I showed you till now were 2 Yuds in a line. This one has 3 Yuds in a line, together with another sign and another symbol. Very, very bizarre. Let's go to Vayaminu B'Hashem of Moshe Avdoi, because there we know we have, you know what, right here. Hashem. It's 3 Yud together with something that is hard to tell exactly what's going on over there. Some sort of backward nun or whatever. So this Haggadah is also from the 1400s. This is from Ashkenaz. So I showed you 4 examples from Ashkenaz, 1 example from Sfarad, but all of these are just examples. As I said before, I have other books that have pages from different machzorim and whatever. Every single one is not Yud. I'm not saying Yud doesn't exist before print, but almost every time something going on. Either it's a Yud, it has a symbol. One of the things that you have here, and there are more variations as well. So what we want to do is we want to understand what's going on over here. So it turns out a lot has been written on this. And as you're going to see, it really does connect to ER with the Yud in Hashem's name, as we're going to soon see. So let's start from the beginning. Here. Let's first talk about, we call it this Shem, the Shem Havaya, we call Shem HaMefoirish and Shem HaMeyuchad. Shem HaMeyuchad, we know what Meyuchad means. It's unique, it's very special. So we understand the purpose of that. What does Shem HaMefoirish even mean? When we say Shem HaMefoirish, we say it all the time, what does it mean? So it turns out that the Rishonim gave two explanations for why it's called Shem HaMefoirish. You have the Rambam and the Moreh Nevuchim and the Ikrim. About Pasha, the word Mefoirish, what does it mean? The Rambam says that Mefoirish means klar. Klar. What does it mean, klar? This is clearly Hashem's name. Why? Everything else is Nishtazoi klar. Why is everything else not so clear? Because every other name of Hashem is about an action. It's an action that Hashem does. An action that Hashem does. I also could do an action. Hashem does chesed. I could do chesed. Hashem is strong. There's human strength. So when you put out a name, it's not clear that it's God, because that name, that verb, is also something that a human being could theoretically do. Where do you have a name where it's so clear to everyone it's only Eibishter? Shem Havaya. Why? Because Shem Havaya is not a name about a behavior. Because it's not about a behavior, you can't be in a position where you say, oh, and human beings also could do the behavior. Not as good, but we could also do the behavior. You're never in that by Elikim, and by Avni, and by Kael, and by every other name. It's an act. Human being has the act as well. And so therefore, when you use that name, it's not clearly Hashem. As a matter of fact, the Rambam doesn't say this, but we know Elikim, sometimes it refers to judges. They have power, right? So you see how the name is not clearly about Hashem. It could be used in other contexts. But Havaya is clearly the Eibishter because it's not a Pu'ula, and so therefore it's Mefoirish, Melashim, clear, klar that it's referring to the Eibishter. That's the Rambam's Taitcha Moreh Nevuchim, which is text number 1. Comes along to Ikrim, and the Ikrim, Rabbi Yosef Alba, and he offers a second interpretation of why we call it Shem HaMefoirish. And he explains Mefoirish, Melashim, separated. He shows us that Chazal use the Lashon like someone who separates himself from society in order to be extremely pious is called who? Prushim. Prushim means you separated yourself. So he says this name is separated. It's separated. Separated from who? It's separated from human beings, human activities, things that we do. It's also separated from us in the fact that we don't pronounce it, as we're soon going to talk about. And so therefore it's Mefoirish, Melashim, separate. Okay. Al Kapanim, that's a general, it just happens to be, it's a name we use all the time, Shem HaMefoirish. It's not so common to know what is the actual meaning of it, and here you saw two interpretations of what it is. Now, there is, as we well know, let's just talk about this for briefly, an Isser to speak it. As I'm going to show you, Chazal didn't speak about an Isser to write it. Chazal spoke about an Isser to speak this name, the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei. In fact, the Mishnah in text 3, we'll read it. The Elu She'en Lahem Chelek L'Olam Haba is a long list, or a short list of people who don't have a Chelek in L'Olam Haba. Abba Shal Omer Af HaHoige Es Hashem Be'ois Yosef. The person who mentions the name, who pronounces the name with its letters, meaning he says the name the way it's pronounced, that person doesn't have a Chelek in L'Olam Haba. The Gemara in Psachim says, Amr Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Loi Ka'olam Hazeh Ha'olam Haba. Our world is very different from the future world. I don't know what Olam Haba means, if he means Yemois HaMashiach, if he means Tchias HaMesim, if he means Gan Eden. But anyway, Ha'olam Hazeh, in the current world, Nichtav B'Yud Hey, we write the name in the Torah, we write it Yud Hey and Vav Hey. But Nikra B'Alav Daled, we read it, already in Gemara's time, we don't read it that way, we just say, Adni, that's what we do when we see Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's the current state of affairs. Avo Leilam Haba, in the future, Kula Yachad. God is going to be one, right? We always say the Hashem Echad U'Shmo Yachad. Here, the interpretation of God's oneness is going to be Nikra B'Yud Hey, V'Nichtav B'Yud Hey. Not only will he be written in Yud Kei Vav Kei, we will also pronounce the word Yud Kei Vav Kei. Again, an expression of the idea of not pronouncing the name. So, if you're not pronouncing the name, what are you doing? So, you're using a substitute. So what are the substitutes that we're using? So interestingly, in the case of the Megadef, someone who curses God, one of the things that is unacceptable behavior, one of the Isurim, is to curse Hashem. It's a Megadef. And there are special dinim in what does it mean to be a Megadef. So the Mishnah wants to know, when you're investigating the Eidim, and you say what the Megadef said, so then you end up saying Hashem's name for no reason, number one. And number two, you're also repeating a curse. So that's also bad. You're repeating what the negative speech. So what do you do? So the Mishnah says that throughout the entire process of deliberation, the Eidim don't say, we heard him say this, and they don't say it exactly. What they do is, they say, because one of the dinim is that the Megadef is a unique thing. You have to create a curse where God is hurting himself, so to speak. So the example is that he may, and the Lashon is, Yosi is a replacement for God, Yake Yosi es Yosi. May Yosi, representing God, should strike Yosi. That's it's interesting. I don't know. I never thought about this. Like, why is the Megadef has this unique rule of where it's not just saying blasphemy against Hashem, but it's a very unique formulation of where you're asking Hashem, so to speak, to quote-unquote hurt himself, and that's where the din is. So the witnesses don't say the word Havaya. Instead, they say Yosi. That's what the Mishnah says in 5. You see, Amar Reb Shmuel ben Karcha, B'chol Yom Danen Es Edom B'chinoi, Yaka Yosi Es Yosi. You have to use a kinoi, because you're not allowed to say Shem Havaya. The Mishnah continues and says that on the last day, before we kill, we need to hear it one time. So we ask one witness, not two. We ask him one, say exactly the way you heard it, and then he says it the way he heard it, and then we go ahead and we put the blasphemer, I don't know if that's a word, to death. The blasphemer, we put him to death. Okay, so that's in 5. So derech hagav. So what do you see here? You see, this was a kinoi that used to be used. Why do they use Yosi? Why do they use Yosi? So Bartanura al-Asar says like this: Ani shamati mipnei shu ben arba oisius. I heard that it's because Yosi is 4 letters. It's a 4-letter word. Va'oila bigamatria elikim. And it's also, if you do the math, it equals 86, just like God's name, Elikim. Lakach machanim, Shem, ben arba, oisius liyosi. And that's why we use, for the 4-letter word, for Yud Kei Vav Kei, we use Yosi. Okay, so it's an interesting explanation. The Yosi is Meramis, it's 4 letters, and as the same Gamati is Elikim. Frek the Tosis Yontif, Ani Shamati? Sounds like a Bartanura has heard something from his Malamed or something. When you learn the Gemara, Rashi says at Al-Asar. Rashi gives this explanation. So Shturim de Kashayla, Tosis Yontif asked on the Bartanura, because the Bartanura wrote a commentary on the entire Mishnah, and he always is summarizing and giving us what Rashi says. So he always knows what Rashi is saying, obviously. And all of a sudden here he's like, I heard. So it's a big problem. There is no real perfect solution to this, but some have come along and said, no, you need to read it this way. It's original and it's interesting. I don't know if it's a true solution, but it's an interesting solution. You have to read Bartanura like this. Yake yosi es yosi ani shamati. Period. The witness says, I heard him say, Yake yosi es yosi, is what the witness says I heard. Period. And then he goes on to his explanation of why they use yosi. So that's a solution that some people have proposed to this problem of the Rav, the Bavadia Bartanura, making himself, implying that he was unaware of the Rashi al-Asar. Okay. Al Kapanim, what do you have from here? You have that there was an Isser to pronounce the name, and we need to use something instead. We have 2 options for using something instead. One was Adni, just saying Adni. That was the Gemara Psachim. Instead of saying Havaya, we say Adni. And number 2, at least in the case of the Megadev, we were using Yosi. Each one of them, in some way, allude to Hashem. What about a prohibition to write? Do we find any prohibition to write? So here, you don't have much at all. While there are many, and I just brought a few, there are many Chazals against saying it, saying, you don't have much against writing. So where does the Isser of writing it start from? So that starts from the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, that's quoting from Megillas Tainus. Megillas Tainus was a document that existed in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, and it was basically a calendar that sets important days on the Jewish calendar. Lamashal, the famous Gemara in Shabbos about Hanukkah, the Gemara didn't create that. That was copied from Megillas Tainus that exists. It still exists today. There are different versions of it. Anyway, so the Gemara here in Rosh Hashanah quotes and says, "Betlasa betishrei on Gimel Tishrei, batelas ad karta min shtaraya." We nullified the mention of God's name in the document. So this is the way Megillas Tainus works. There's always a brief line in Aramaic, and then it's followed, it seems like later, someone added in Hebrew the explanation. So what's the background explanation of what happened on Gimel Tishrei? Once the Greeks, it's not entirely clear when this was, but it is clear when this was. This was the story of Hanukkah. That one of the Gzedas they made, you're not allowed to mention God. And when the Chashmonoim overpowered them, so they made a Gzeda, the Chashmonoim did Sheyu Maskinu Shein Shamayim Afilu B'Shtaros. You have to mention God all the time, right? It's like a pushback against the Gzeda. So everyone would write in documents like this: you would write the year of the monarch. The monarch was the king was the Chashmonai king, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Lekeil Elyon, but you would say God. So you would mention God in the Shtaris. They were not so happy when the sages heard about this. They were upset. Why? They said, you're going to pay your debt. Then the document loses its value. They're going to put it in the garbage. And so Hashem's name is going to end up in the garbage. So Bitlum, the Chazal, it looks like it was a fight. Chashonim were like, yeah, we want God's name in all the documents. Chazal were like, no, this is a terrible idea. And eventually Bitlum, they nullified it, and people stopped writing Hashem's name in the documents. And that day was a Yom Tif, and that's what the history of Gimel Tishrei is. What do you see from this Gemara? You see from this Gemara that the idea of writing Hashem's name was not something...
What did they actually write into the Lekel?
What was that?
What did they actually write? Which name?
It sounds like Lekel. It sounds like they weren't writing Havaya. So you go Alachas Kama Kama. If it is true that they only wrote Lekel, Madach Lekel is a problem writing Alachas Kama Kama Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's what it sounds. That's the way it sounds. Now,
what do we do today in the Shtaris?
we don't write Hashem's name in these documents. No. We write Beis Hey maybe at the top. That I'm not even sure. We have to check.
Kel is the same as Beis Hey. It's an acronym.
No. So Kel is not. Kel is one of the Shemas. Kel is one of the Shemas. Although it does look like it's related to Elikim, it's one of the Shemas. Okay. So all these are important subjects, and they need to be. We need to go through it. I don't know if we're going to talk about God today. Okay. Now, by the way, the Rosh Hashanah and the Rebbe corresponded about this Gemara about whether it's usher to write Beis Hey on a letter. The Poyol, the Rebbe, after thinking about this for a while, the Rebbe decided that it's completely mutter and advisable and a good thing. And there was just last week the first Pirsum Rishon of a letter that came out. The Rebbe wrote to someone that I could tell, you're going through issues, and maybe it's the fact that you didn't write Baruch Hashem at the top of your letter. So Stam, the Rebbe was very into that. The Frierdiker Rebbe also, but the Rosh Hashanah never wrote Baruch Hashem, and he referenced this Gemara. But we're not going to get into that of whether the Baruch Hashem is an issue or not. I'm just making a passing reference of that. Now, to go further, there's an interesting medrash that implies that the name Yud-Kei, that we say, Ka, right, and we treat it as Kodesh, what's the origin of that name? From the following medrash of Mashma, this was also, they didn't want to write Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Where do you see that? Medrash Tehillim says, Hallelujah, Lama lo yamar Hallelu Hashem. Why doesn't it say the whole Shem Havaya? Why is it only Yud-Kei? Because the world's not worthy for the whole name. Ela b'chetze, only half. So what's the amazing thing here? Yud-Kei you have in the Torah twice. Both in Oz Yashir. Both in Beshalach, once in Oz Yashir and once at the end of Parshas Beshalach. That's it, in the entire Torah. And then in Yeshaya a few times, and then all of the many, many, many dozens of mentions are in Tehillim. And the mashmalos of this medrash is that originally it was an abbreviation. We don't want to write the whole name. It's mitarnished. Okay, so I'll write it in an abbreviation. Okay, but Poyol, it looks like that at a certain point, it became a name Bifnei Atzmai, and we treat it as such as a name Bifnei Atzmai as well. Okay, so what were Jews doing, given that we don't want to write Yud Kei Vav Kei? So what were they doing? So really, if you want to do this properly and right, today you could do this a lot because there are the Dead Sea Scrolls, so you could see what they were doing at that time. We have the Cairo Gniza, so you could see what was going on about 1,000 years ago at that time. But today, we're not going to focus so much on that, and I didn't spend time researching and looking into that. Suffice it to say that in every generation, when they were writing something in Torah, of course you write Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? And a real Sefer Torah, you write Yud Kei Vav Kei. But what happens when you're not writing a real Sefer Torah? Very often, not always, very often substitutes were sought. Now the shaila is, what's going to be a substitute? So we all use substitutes today. For example, hey with an apostrophe. That's a version of a substitute. But was that the substitute that was always being used? No, it wasn't. What was the substitute? Different generations, there were different substitutes that were used for the Shem Havaya, not being used in the Sefer Torah. Different substitutes were being used at different times. And as it turns out, the phenomena of what we have today in our Siddurim, of Yud Yud, that is a very recent development. That is a very recent development. That starts when they started printing, and we'll come back to that. Because if you look at all the sources that talk about the Yuds as a replacement, as you're going to see, we're going to have many sources that talk about the three Yuds. So let's start going through those sources now. And at least when you come to the Middle Ages, at least when you're in the year 900, 1000, 1100, This is a very, very common thing to do Yuds. Now, Yuds is only one category. Then I showed you there was backwards Beis, backwards Nun, and that, we'll speak about that later. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the sources that spoke as a given. That when we're writing a Siddur, when we're writing a Makser, a Haggadah, whatever it is, and you don't want to write Havaya, because you're not allowed to, what are you going to do? You're going to do 3 Yuds. And the question was why? And you're going to see there's going to be a lot of suggestions that are being thrown out there. I don't mean this. What is that? Sometimes what it means when you have a lot of suggestions that are being given for something, sometimes it means there isn't one. Like it isn't entirely clear how this developed. And so we'll circle back to that as well, how this developed. But let's look at the sources. Yeah, what do you want to say?
Yuds, the 2 Yuds is not separate.
We'll talk about the 2 Yuds first. The Poyol, you don't have.
The name of Hashem. It's completely.
No, 2 Yuds are not a name of Hashem. The 2 Yuds are not a name of Hashem.
Are you suggesting that the reason why we have all these different types of writings is because they were scared they're going to throw them out? That's the only reason why they wouldn't write it?
The reason we have 2 Yuds in our Siddur today, and the reason in previous generations there were 3 Yuds with all that stuff, was they wanted to find something to replace Yud Kei Vav Kei because of the chash of it being thrown out or brought into an improper place or anything associated with that.
They weren't scared. It was like an actual Torah.
Yeah, Sefer Torah. You keep it on Kodesh or whatever. Yeah. Now, I want to be clear. There are, for example, the first printed Haggadah, if you look at the first from 1482, is Shem Havaya. There are Siddurim today. If you go to, I know we, the Chabad Siddurim don't have this. But in other shuls, Siddurim are written out as Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's not like, right? A Sefer Kodesh, it's not an issue. The main issue is in documents that have Achshasha getting thrown out. But there is sometimes, once you're doing it there, let's do it for a Siddur too, like why not?
That would explain why in the beginning the first prints had it, because printing was so valuable that people treated it almost like a Torah.
It could be, but it was very soon. There were very few, yes, correct. But you'll see, very soon, most of the printing, right away they transferred over to the Yud. There was a little bit Yud this style, and then they completely dropped it and they went to Yud. But let's talk about the history of the 3 Yuds. So our first source is a non-Jewish source, because this is very interesting. There's a guy by the name of Abu al-Biruni. Al-Biruni was an Iranian, and you see his dates over here. He lived in the 10th and 11th centuries, and he traveled to India and he wrote a whole bunch of books, and those books survived today and they were translated into English. So he's writing about how the Hindus refer to their God, and he writes Bein Advarim, similar to this is the manner in which the Jews write the name of God. Obviously I added the hyphen there. These by 3, which means namely by 3 Hebrew Yuds. In the Torah, the word is Yud Kei Vav Kei and pronounced the way it's pronounced. Sometimes they also say, fine. What do you see here? You see over here, Al-Biruni writing that by him was a Davra Pasha. Jews, how do they write Shem Hashem? 3 Yuds. Source number 1. Source number 2. Reb Tuvia ben Eliezer. There's a medrash called Psikta Zutrasa, and otherwise known as Lekach Toiv. But when we say medrash for this, we need to be careful, because usually when we think about Midrashim, we think about Tanoim and Amoraim. He lived in the times of the Rishonim. He lived, I believe, in the Balkans, and he wrote this medrash. Look what he writes. He writes in Parshas Nasir, Cheneged Shalish Yudin, Yivarecha Yor Yisa, Toisin Es Hashem B'Shloisha Yudin. What does he say here? He also attests to the fact that they wrote with 3 Yuds, and he tells you the 3 Yuds represent the 3 psukim of the Berachas Kohanim. Yivarecha Hashem V'Yishmerecha, Yud, Yor Hashem Panav Elecha V'Yishmerecha, Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha V'Yasem HaShalom. The 3 Yuds represent that. Again, no mention of anything else, just straight up 3 Yuds, and that's the closest to the Rylands Haggadah, which we had over here, which was, again, most of the times was just 3 Yuds. They weren't in a line, they were like a segel, but it was 3 Yuds. Let's continue. In the same Sefer, in Parsha Shmos, he gives another explanation. Why do we write with 3? Yud al Shem Yud Shal Shakai, Yud Shal Elikim, Yud Shal Eya. So, I don't know if Eya is a name. He doesn't have Havaya here, interestingly. So it could be because that you don't want to even touch. Maybe it's so holy you don't want to even be meramis it. But he finds 3 of them, right? Svakos doesn't have a Yud in it. And what's another name? What was that? Kale also doesn't have a Yud in it. So he looked at from the Zayin Shem Mishen and Mchakim, beside for Havaya, these are the 3: Shakai, Elikim, and the word and the final one as well. And so therefore he says that's what the 3 Yuds represent. They represent these things. So it's interesting. You have the same author when he gives 2 reasons for something in 2 different places. That's a little interesting. Let's move along. This one is perhaps the most fascinating one. This one comes from the Orchos Chaim. Orchos Chaim was written in Lunel. This is in Provence, in South France, in the 1400s. And by the way, the Sefer Kol Boy is the same Sefer. It's just an abridgment of it. And And he writes over there, I'm not going to give you the context, it's also about God's name, but it's really not relevant for what we're talking about, and because we're limited on time, we'll skip that. And so, but he does say, Gimel Yudin, you get 3 Yud, Shem Shemay Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the name of Hashem. So let's just stop right here. Let's not stop here. Hayosim Ipasik Shavayisa Malach Halikim V'Goymer. That's all he says. What is going on over here? 3 Yuds that come out of the Pasuk Vayisa Malach Halikim, a Pasuk in Parshas B'Shalach. Okay. So, what's going on over here? Here, you have to put on your Gal Einai Va'abita Kabbalistic hat right now. Turn the page. This is all miyusad on a Rashi in Masechet Sukkah, Daf Mem Hey Amid Aleph. The Gemara over there is discussing, what do we say on Sukkot by Hoshaimu? And one opinion says, we say, Ana Hashem Hoshiana, which we know exactly what that means. Ana is please, and now, can mean both. Hashem, Hoshia, save us. No, again, please, and now. So we know exactly what that means. Comes along another Tana and says, no, don't say Ana Hashem Hoshiana. Say, which we say till today, Ani Vahu Hoshiana. What's Ani Vahu Hoshiana? Me and him Hoshiana? What does that mean? Ani Vahu Hoshiana. So Rashi over there explains that Ani is Hashem's name. And Vahu, Vez, Hey, Vav is also Hashem's name. How is Ani and Vahu Hashem's name? It's just saying Hashem, Hoshiana. That's essentially what it's saying. So Rashi has a long explanation over there, which basically borders on Kabbalah. And this obviously was a very popular thing that was going on during the times of the Rishonim, where you look at the 3 psukim. So here you have 3 psukim in Parshas B'Shalach. They're consecutive one another. The first one starts by Yisa Malach Elikim, the next one by Yovei B'Machle Mitzrayim, and next one by Yeit Moshe Es Yadai. What's unique about these 3 psukim? It's amazing how these things were realized. There's the only 3 psukim consecutive in the Torah that have 72 letters. They have exactly 72 letters, and it's 3 psukim in a row. Now, why is 72 letters important? Because one of the spellings of Yud K Vav K, if you do Yud Vav Dalet for Yud, Hey, if you do, I think Hey Yud Aleph probably, Hey Vav Vav Aleph Vav. And if you do it in the maximum, you get Shem Ab 72. That's how we have. So wow, so you have 3 psukim with 72 letters. That's obviously significant. Okay, so now what happens here? The teaching became. And again, the exact source of this teaching is not entirely clear. But the teaching became that each letter here is Hashem's name. What does that mean? You take 1 letter from Pasuk 1, 1 letter from Pasuk 2, 1 letter from Pasuk 3, and you match them together and it becomes the name of Hashem. Which ones do you match with each other? So the Kabbalah is like this. First letter from the first Pasuk, so that's the Vav, which is why I made it big. Then you take the last letter from the second Pasuk, which is the Hey, and then you take the first letter from the third pasuk. What do you have? Vahu. Vahu is Hashem's name. But then you could do the same thing a second time. What's the second time? Go back to the first pasuk. The Yud, so Yud, then the Lamed, or the second to last letter of the second pasuk, Yud Lamed, and then the second letter of the third pasuk, so it would be Yud Lamed, Yud Yali. It's a name of Hashem. And likewise, you do that consecutively for each one of these things, and each one becomes a name of Hashem. Now, if you do this, you also have Ani. So you'll notice that in the word Me'achareim, I made the Aleph big. I don't remember what number it is, and that corresponds to the Nun in Ha'anan. It's the same number, just going backward. And then I did the Yud in Kadim, also it's the same going forward. And hence you have the word Ani is also representing Hashem's name. So you basically have 72 names of Hashem that are here. 72 different names of Hashem, and there's a list. We'll see in a second. Raziel Amalek gives the entire list of all these names. What happens if you do number 10? So it means count 10 from the first one, backwards 10 from the second one, and then 10 from the third one. You end up with... What do you end up with? You end up with Yud, Yud, Yud. Lifnei, Halayla, and Hashem. There's Hashem's name. Yud, Yud, Yud. So therefore, one of the names of Hashem is Yud, Yud. Yud is one of the names of Hashem. This is what? It's a Nikla Sefer. Orchas Chaim. Orchas Chaim is referring to. The Gimel Yudin are Hashem's name because it comes out of these psukim. This is the background of how it comes out of these psukim. So, and it's clear from the context that Orchas Chaim is explaining. That's why we write in our Sidurim and in our Machzorim, we write Yud, Yud, Yud as a replacement for Yud Kei Vav Kei, because it's Hashem's name as expressed in these three
So it
psukim.
really is Hashem's name. So
It's meramis to Hashem's name. When we say here it's Hashem's name, it doesn't mean it's Einan Chakim. The word Ani, you're allowed to be named. There's basically, you can say there's two categories of Hashem's name. There's Hashem's name, there's probably more. There's Zayin Shem Einan Chakim. Then you have Kinuyim, like Rachum and Chanun and whatever. And then you have these types of things, right? And then you have where you say every letter in the Torah is Hashem's name. So you probably have many different levels, and obviously each one is meaningful in a certain way. I don't know exactly how to say it, but yeah, Yud 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 would still be something that theoretically, you'll see the place are going to argue.
On the list of Raziel Malach,
Oh, so let's talk about Raziel Malach. So now Raziel Malach is number 13. So what does he do? Raziel Malach is hard to identify exactly when it comes out, but in this period of the Rishonim, 1100, 1200, 1300, something like that, is when this Sefer comes out. It's a Kabbalah Sefer. What does he do? In the Sefer, he gives the entire list of all. He has Vahu, and then in order. So if you count, you go to number 10 in his list, he has Yud, Yud, Yud. And he writes over there, He Roish Has, I don't know what this word is, Hashviyos, Shalei, I don't know what that is. Sviyos, Shviyos, I don't know. But then he writes, the Heime'idim, Al Gimel Ptushos, Ashal Ha'olam Oimed Ben. The Yud, Yud, Yud represents three Ketushos. Echad B'Eser Advarim, so it represents the first one, Seres HaDibris. The Echad B'Eser HaSfiris, the second one represents Eser Sfiris. The Echad B'Asar Niflei Shel Mitzrayim, the next one represents the 10 Makkos. So he's giving it up. So far, in terms of meaning of Yud, 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 we so far have three. We have Birchas Kohanim, we have the three Yuds in Hashem's names, the Elikim, Shakai, and Eka, and you have over here the three tens. That's in terms of Raziel HaMalach. Now, there's a sefer called Mincha Shai. Mincha Shai is printed in all the Mikrois Gedolos. It was authored in the 1500s by a man, Yedidia Shlomo Rafal Nertzi, and his nakuda was about establishing the proper text and the proper Mesorah of the Torah. So, for example, this is on the pasuk Levin Yamin Amar Yedid Hashem Yishkoin Levetach Halav. So he showed there are some people who argue that Levin Yamin there needs to be spelled with three yuds. But Poyol, we only spell Binyamin there with one yud. So these are the types of things that he discusses in the bottom in his commentary. Now, there he writes as follows. Matzasi kasu b'sefer Kabbalah anikra shara shamayim. I found in a Kabbalah sefer, and I did not investigate to figure out which sefer this is. B'dabrai al ayim bei shemes hamasurafim mevayisa vayava vayei peshem ha'esrim shehu gimel yudin. So when this Kabbalah sefer is talking about these psukim that we saw before, number 20 is three yuds. The problem is it's not number 20, it's number 22. I'm pretty sure I counted, and it's number 22. But anyway, this is what it says in this Kabbalah sefer. If you calculate Yud Kei Vav Kei, you get 26. Right? Add 4, one for the Yud, one for the Vav, one for the Hey, one for the other Hey. Hakol Lamed, you get 30. The secret is Ki La Hashem. Ki, 30 is Hashem. And therefore, Shema, Yud, Yud, Yud. And that's why you have 3 Yuds. 3 Yuds is because Havaya is 26, plus 4 letters, you get 30. Vasoy le Binyamin Omar, and that's why Binyamin, according to this Kabbalah sefer, we don't do this, should be 3 Yuds, because somehow those 3 Yuds is the 30, Vamei Binyavin, alright, real cryptic Kabbalah here, Adkan. So, Mincha Shai quotes this from a Kabbalah sefer, and now we just got...
23 Yuds in there again, Binyavin.
Yeah, he put the 3 Yuds in Binyamin, yeah.
Binyavin also.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder, yeah, that's interesting. So, what do you have here? Another explanation for why Yud, Yud, Yud for Hashem's name. Here it is a gematria for Yud Kei Vav Kei together with the 4. Okay, next, Menachem Tziyuni. Tziyuni is it's a relatively famous commentary written on the Torah. Comes out of the world of Ashkenaz in the 1300s as well. And here he discusses what the Yidden were doing in Mitzrayim. And he says that the Yidden were told to put the blood al shtei hamezuzos, right, left, ba'al hamashkois, and on the post above. So they had to make an upside down segel. So he says, I received a Kabbalah that Yidden in Mitzrayim used to use Hashem's name like we do, where you do Yud, Yud, Yud. And the third Yud is on top of the other 2. This is the first source that we see talking about the third Yud on top, which the clearest example of that was in the Rylands Haggadah, where you had the Yud Yud with the third one on the top as an opposite segel. So he says that, and this is a name of Kedusha, and so that's what Hashem told them. Hashem told them, put blood here, 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 and it was basically, they were drawing Hashem's name onto the door. And then he goes on to say, it's connected to Yud Sviros. We had that in Reziel HaMalach. Yud Mamoros. We had that in Reziel HaMalach. No, we did not have that in Reziel HaMalach. The Yud Dibros. We did have that. So it's another thing of 10. We have 4 things that are 10, so it's you choose which of the 3 you're going to employ. He goes on, V'hem asuyin keneged gimel haviyos. These are also meant to represent the 3 haviyos. I think this means Haya Hoive V'yiyah. I'm not sure though. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloich. That's my theory. I don't know for sure. V'chein Siduram, and that's the right order. Meaning, what's the order? The right order is, when you make Hashem's name, there's an order. You have to go right, left, on top. That's the order how you need to do it. But then he notes that Moshe Rabbeinu, if you look at the Psukim, said, put it on the post and then on the mezuzah. He changed the order. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want them to write the name B'Kedusha. By changing the order, it's an amazing thing he's saying here. When you write it like this, now it's not Kaddish, it doesn't have Kedusha in it. When you do it like this, it has Kedusha. Hashem said, write it in a way of Kedusha. Moshe Rabbeinu, we know there are 3 times, the Gemara says, where he changed the directive because he thought it wasn't a good idea. Moshe Rabbeinu, for whatever reason, he doesn't explain, didn't want Hashem's name to be written out in a way of Kedusha for whatever reason, and therefore he changed it. The Siyuni continues and says, the Chassid, I believe this is a reference to Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, because Siyuni was very influenced by Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. We know this from other places as well. So he writes, he didn't write it like this, because it's too holy. So he just did it like this in one line. Okay, so we got a lot of stuff here. In this text, we got explanations. We got explanations in terms of the Sfiros, the Yud Sfiros, Yud Mamoros, Yud Dibros. We got an explanation that this was done in Mitzrayim with the post. We learned that the order matters. We learned that there's 2 ways of doing it. As an upside down segel that has Kedusha if done in the right order, and as a one line that doesn't have Kedusha. Okay, very important for what's going on over here. The Ramon Shulchan Aruch quotes, Hashem Shekosim B'Sidurin, the names that we write in our Siddur, Beis Yudin, Ve'echad Agabeim, a 3rd Yud on top of the 2, Mutter L'machka Imhu L'Tzoydech. Better not to, but if you need to, you're allowed to erase it. All of the sources that we so far looked at were, relatively speaking, you could say, Ashkenaz sources, all about the Gimel Yudin. Now we're going to move to the Sephardi sources.
The Shar Shemayim was written by the father of the Ralbag, who's the son-in-law of the Ramban.
I have a hard time believing that.
At least, unless it's different sefer.
But the Ralbag's father couldn't have been a Makobel.
But that, I don't know.
No, I understand. I don't question that. I also saw that. But to me, it's a Davar HaPashas that Ralbag's father could not have been a Makobel.
Well,
so
it says it's
why?
It's
because
in
we know what we know about.
It's from the Lubavitch library.
I understand. I understand. But I doubt that Ralbag's father is a Makobel. Because Ralbag was a very different worldview. He was Gersanides. He was an Aristotelian, Maimonidean philosopher who, I don't know, I have a very hard time.
People can argue with their father.
Take the Sefer, open up, find me the quote. Okay, I'll give you a prize if you do. All right, let's go back there. Number 17. Number 17. The Rambam. Here's the Rambam. So now we're moving to Sfard. She'ela nishom min harav agadol marana v'rabbanim Moshe. Okay. God protect him. The son of Maimon Adayan Zatal al Adam Sharak b'Talisay Parsha Vayomer. That someone on his talis he put the Parsha of Vayomer. Makes a lot of sense. Vayomer speaks about tzitzis. So he wrote the whole Vayomer on his talis. The Chacham came and gave him a mutter. You're not allowed to put Vayomer on your talis. You walk into that with the bathroom and whatever, and things like that. But like, keep on my man.
Is this his clothing or totally his talis?
No, the talis there was strings hanging from it. Yeah.
Nothing.
The Kosav Hashem Shloisha Yudin. And they wrote it, Hashem's name, he didn't write Yud Kei Vav Kei, he only wrote Shloisha Yudin. So maybe you could be Mekel because he didn't write Hashem's name. And this is what the Rambam answered. The Rambam answered what he answered, which I don't remember. But what do you see from here? You see, we moved to Egypt, we're in Mitzrayim now. They wrote Hashem's name on a talis, 3 Yudin. That's also the same idea. Moving. There are problems with that. Number 18. Reb Shmuel Tzertze. He wrote a Pirush to Ibn Ezra, and he writes as follows. He quotes from Shlomo ibn Gabriel. We don't have time to talk about him, but a fascinating individual who Jewish history forgot because for whatever reason. But he wrote Piyutim, and one of the Piyutim he talks about the Galgalim. We know that in the medieval system you have 9 different levels of where the different planets are, right? The moon is in the lowest Galgal, and the highest Galgal is each one has their own planets in it. And he says that the highest Galgal, he wrote, is Yud, Hiasiris, the highest one is Galgal HaSeichel. It represents Seichel. This goes to Seichel HaPoyol, which we can't get into today. I think we spoke about it in a previous class. That's the Remes. Asiriya Kodesh LaHashem. It's because that highest level, the 10th Galgal, that represents Seichel, so it's sanctified to Hashem. Says Reb Shmuel Tzertze, V'istako ki Yud hi Asiris la'alef. The Yud is the 10th letter. So, v'amisaknim lahasim shloisha Yudim b'makam Hashem anichbad shnayim arachim v'echad l'maylam em ramzu l'seidam. The people who made this takana that we're going to put 3 Yudin instead of Yud Kei Vav Kei, and we're going to have 2 of them and a third one on top, opposite Sego, they have a very deep reason, explanation. He doesn't go on and give the deep reason and the deep explanation for this, but this is what he accounts for this, and he talks about the Sego. Last source for Yudin comes from the Radvaz. Sha'alta mimeni, he's in the 1500s. Also Mitzrayim. Al mashanag hu ha'am lichtov gimel Yudin b'makam Hashem. Is it mutter l'machgoy alav? Loi tshuva, he says, Kima shanagu lichtov keinu sha'oil in gimel Yudin kishem havayim dalados yetzav. He gives the explanation that we already saw earlier from, I don't remember who. Someone gave this explanation. It was Reb Yedidia, Shlomo Rafal Nertzi, that it equals Shem Havai. He says that's the reason. Then he says, but in terms of erasing it, not such a good idea. I know someone else said you could, but I don't think it's such a good idea. It's not, you shouldn't be erasing this because it represents Kedusha. And as you can see, the Ramah just told us it is okay to erase it. So basically, whether Yud has Kedusha on it or not was debated. We don't need to go into that, and that's enough for the Yud. Okay. It seems that the earliest iteration, all the earlier sources spoke about 3 Yudin. That was the name, and as we saw, each one was giving another explanation for where it was coming from. We saw at least 5 or 6 different ideas of what this was meant to represent. But then, you have sources, also almost in the time of the Rishonim, not as early, where they talk about a Yud and a Yud, sometimes 3, sometimes 2, but now with a symbol, with something, with a backwards nun, with a base. Let's have a look. So, first up, Medrash Seichel Toiv. Medrash Seichel Toiv so it's authored by the Menachem ben Shlomo in the 1200s. So here, it's actually not in our version of it, but it's quoted in the Sefer HaSufos. I'll talk more about the Sefer HaSufos later on, in a few minutes. So he writes over there, Ucheneged Gimel Yudin, Yud V'Rechacha, Yud V'Yomer, Yud Yisa, Kaisan Hashem, Chutz L'Mikra, outside of the Sefer Torah, Begimel Yudin Kach, Yud. Okay, so far nothing new. But here, the next line, Omesavavin Svivoiseyen, and we circle around them, Veiz Achas, a Beiz, Lefisha Mehem, Yoitze Shem, Shloishim Ushtaim, because then you get 32. V'hu Kasuv Kach Hapoch, and you write it this way, Yud, and then there's your backwards base that's supposed to be there. But you have to understand that limitations of print, Lav Dafka, it's the way it appeared, Mamish in the original Ksav Yad. V'hakoysim b'svarim kach, but Beis Yudin, Yud with a backwards base, Einoi Klum. So he says, 2 Yuds and a backward base, no good. It's Yud, and a backwards base. Why? We get the reason. Lamed base Nesivas Chachma. What's going on over here? This is Sefer called Sefer Yetzirah. And in the Sefer Yetzirah it says that Hashem created this world with Lamed base Nesivas Chachma. What is the combination? On the one hand, you have the teaching of the Esespheres. God created the world of Esespheres. On the other hand, God created the world with the letters, with all the alphabets. 10 plus 22 is 32. So we say there's Lamed base and Siddur Chachma. This is quoted in Siddur all the time. So by adding that base, you have Lamed base and Siddur Chachma. Now let me tell you what's not clear. When you say base, what do we mean? Ksav Ashuri base, or the way you write in script? Because it could be both. Base. He doesn't talk about. He writes Hafuch. It's backwards. But is it a block like this? Or, you know that base that we write like this? That's like more roundy, that's right. Ashkenazim used to write that way many, many hundreds of years ago. So, is it a backward thing which gives it more of a loop? Is it a backwards thing like I'm doing a backwards base like that? Okay, so that's not entirely clear, and it kind of could go one way or another. As you'll see, we'll try to tie this all into the different versions that we have. Next, now is the Sefer HaSufos. This is a manuscript from the 1400s that was never really printed in full. It was here, bits and pieces here and there, but there's a piece in there that comes from Ravya. Ravya is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yoel HaLevi, and he lived in the 1100s, 1200s, and he writes as follows. Hashem begimel nikudim. We write it in 3 dots, kemoi gimel Yudin, like 3 Yudin. Lo yachinam nagu. It's not for not. This is how you have to do it. Gimel Yudin shein nikudim. Beis momata, 2 dots under. Ve'echad momayla segel. So far nothing new, but now comes a new thing. Umeshicha arucha lemafreya. Meshicha means something that draws out. Arucha long, lemafreya backwards. Meshicha arucha lemafreya. It sounds like just a line. It's not entirely clear. I know it's backwards. Kimin beis. Kimin beis. So he's using the letter beis, but he's describing it as this meshicha arucha lemafreya, this backward type of long thing. So that's is it the square? Is it the round? It's not entirely clear. Okay. Gimel Yudin b'gematria lamed v'abeis. Okay, that's not new. We already have that before. But so these are 2 sources that are about adding this extra symbol into the thing. 3 yuds with a symbol. Next, Rabbi Elazar Rekeach, also one of the Rishonim, Lakach Gimel Yudin b'Shem Hashem ubeis Saviv. Again, same thing. Harei lamed beis, and he says Keneged lamed beis nivra olam, and he adds Lakach pasak bebeis bereishis asayim b'lamed leina kol Yisrael. The Torah begins with a beis and ends with a lamed, representing this 32. Okay, and now we come to the final source from this category, Maharam Mintz. Maharam Mintz is one of the Rishonim. You see his dates here, 1415 to 1480, and he wrote a letter to his Rebbe, the Trumas Hadeshen. Trumas Hadeshen is Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, and he is Chuvas. And this is printed both in Maharam Mintz and it's printed in Trumas Hadeshen. But the questioner was Maharam Mintz. So he writes like this: Yehi Shlama v'chaim arichi l'Rav Hagoyim Neir Yoyer Moiri Arav Isserlin. So Yisrael Isser is the same name. So his name was Yisrael, so he was known as Isserlin. Okay. He asked him a whole bunch of questions. So I took that all out. Teach me, master, mutter limchoik oisam shemois hanichtavim b'sudurim uvetfilos. Are you allowed to delete the names? V'hein nishamim ke'ein shnei yudin, 2, not 3. V'al gabeim vav. Now we got a vav. We never had a vav before. We had a vase. Now we have 2 yuds, and on top of the 2 yuds is a vav. What's the reason? It makes so much sense. 2 yuds and a vav, that's 26. You're missing the last page?
Yes.
So that makes so much sense. So now we got the explanation for that. So maybe because it represents Shem Havaya, it has Kedusha, you're not allowed to delete it. Or maybe maybe this is why we don't make the vav yud vav. If you're trying to get to 26, do yud vav. We don't do that. We do it akuma, crooked, shvura. It's not a full vav. Va'afucha, backwards. Okay, so basically you have a vav that's on top of 2 yuds, backwards, broken, and slanty. Okay. And so maybe because of that, so it should be mutter to erase it. Fine, it is what it is. The Trumas Hadeshen gave him an answer, but again, we're not going into the question of deleting or not. All right. So now you see, this is across the board. You have many different variations of this. You're seeing some of these variations. But let's just quickly review and go back. So we started with this. We'll come back to that last. Let's go to this one over here. So now let's go back here. What did we see here? We saw in this Washington Agada, we saw Hashem's name here. What does it look like? So the way what comes to me most is say this looks like a backwards nun. That's what was my initial thing. But now with these sources here, you say, well, is it a backwards nun? Or maybe it's an upside down vav with a little flourish on the top, right? So maybe that's what it is. Or maybe it's a backwards vase that we were talking. Or again, maybe people see something and then every artist adds their flourish, so you don't know exactly. But it could be any of those 2 things.
It doesn't matter.
It's 2 yud right? Two Yuds. So either it's the backwards Vav, but it's not on top, it's to the side, or it's the backwards Vase. So it's going to be one of those two. That's in terms of him. In the Ashkenazi Agada over here, what did we have? Here we had 3 Yuds, right? This was the 3 straight Yuds. So here you have 3 Yuds. This is where you can make an argument. Is this 3 Yuds with a cursive vase? Is it 3 Yuds with a Vav and a flourish? Is it 3 Yuds with a regular vase? Not entirely clear, but it is what it is. Let's wrap this up, Rabbi said. Let's wrap this up. So therefore, like this. At the end of the day, let's take off our Torah hat for a second and put on a history hat for a second. Historically, it's still not so clear. What was Epis? When did it start? And why? Why? We knew we needed something for Shem Havaya, but why did we need this? So is it the case that one of these explanations was when they started it was caused one of these explanations? Sometimes when you have 20 explanations for a certain thing, sometimes it indicates that maybe this was not the reason. Maybe there's another reason that was going on. So people do discuss this. I found an article where someone wanted to argue, I don't know if this is true or not, but he wanted to argue that maybe it developed as an abbreviation, which is what is similar to what I opened with. And maybe you started off, let's say, with 1 Yud, or let's say, I don't know, the truth is it's not so Negeya. I don't want to get into his theories, because at the end of the day, I'll put it out there this way. There's no theory that I read, I was persuaded, this makes sense. So it's shrouded a shtickle in mystery of how or why this happened. So that's in terms of number 1. How this developed, okay? Now, we know what it's doing. We know it's trying to say, I can't have Shem Havaya here. Why Dafke this? And how it developed, not so clear. And we saw 10 different, at least, interpretations of what was going on over here. Each one depending on if you're doing 2 Yuds, if you're doing 1 Yud, if you're mixing a Bezin, if you're mixing a Vavin, or what's happening. Okay. And then you come to the error of print. I'm only saying I could judge by Haggadahs. I can't say I looked at everything else.
Error.
Error of print. So when you come to the error of print, what happened was, there are some prints, especially in Ashkenaz, 2 very famous prints of Haggadahs in Ashkenaz, where they continue this. Where if you look, there's Yud with a epis of Vav or a Nun, a backwards Nun going through it. You could see this. But very soon that was it. There's 2 or 3 prints this happened, and it was over. And then it just became Yud. And that would seem the pashtus that when you're setting type, each letter you needed to carve out and to use. So I think they asked themselves. You could say they asked them, what do we need this for? Why can't I just use just use Yud Yud? What I need to have the Yud Yud with the flourish. So it would seem that Yud Yud, the origins of Yud Yud, it would seem is just doing what they did, which itself is not entirely clear how it happened. A lot of meaning was said, and then saying, how can we do this in a simplified way? Simplified way meant just Yud, because you don't want to go above the line. That makes it very complicated in print. So if you're doing like this. So you could have done 3 Yuds, but remember, so many people are already doing 2 Yuds, even in manuscript. And making a backwards Vav or a thing going up through the thing, also complicated. So just Yud Yud. And so that's what happened. So our Yud Yud is just an abbreviated form of what used to be a Yud Yud symbol, or Yud Yud with a third thing.
Okay.
This is Bapashta. Yeah, this is Bapashta's my theory. Yeah.
But we don't know why that was...
Why the triple Yud was Hatchalah? I
can't... Triple Yud, but like the funny Yud.
What funny Yud?
The 3rd Yud is like a backwards base. I don't know.
Oh, it's not a 3rd Yud. So you didn't see. The Ashkenaz has 3 Yuds and an additional symbol.
Yeah, but like what?
So the symbol has nothing to do with the Yud. It's either 2 Yuds or 3 Yuds. It's either with a symbol or without a symbol. You have all these different variations. Okay? Now, in terms of this, in the Svarim, when they spoke about the symbol, they spoke about a vase or they spoke about a vav. That's all you have in terms of the. Now, let's bring it back to Chodesh Iyar, and with this we're going to finish. The Sikha, the Rebbe, I'm sorry I'm going a little over, right? But we started late, so we're not an hour yet. It says in Lekut HaSichos, Chelek Lamed Beis, number 72, like this. You'll see this is interesting because I'm going to add a new insight into Yud Yud. Isa Bisvarim She'iyar Hu Rosh Tevis Ani Hashem Reifecha. Right? Ani Hashem Reifecha. Dainu Shechodesh Zeh Mesugol Inyan Refuah. So all Yiddish number 1 have a Refuah Shleima. Then there's Ha'ara, and the Rebbe has Ha'ara 1. It says like this. Where's the source for this? Sam Sofer, Shari Yisachar, who's the Munkacher, the Minchas Alazar, Maimer Iyar. Then the Rebbe adds a paragraph. Va'av she'iyar u'bebeis Yudin dafka. And the Rebbe brings from halacha that when you write a get, iyar is dafka to Yudin. So what's the problem? The problem is ani Yud is Yud Kei Vav Kei Hashem Refacha. What's the other Yud doing there? I don't have anything for the other Yud. Says the Rebbe Yesh Loimar Ki b'havara nishmas rak Yud achas. When you pronounce iyar, there's only iyar. You don't say iyar. You say iyar. So you could ignore the second Yud. It's a silent. Then the Rebbe says the Eishar Yisachar Shon al derech HaKabbalah. Look at what the Munkacher wrote. He gives an explanation of Kabbalah and Kedoshim Tavshim and Dalid as well. So I looked up the sources. Says the Munkacher like this. I'll summarize outside. He brings this teaching about iyar is ani Hashem Refecha, and he asks the same Shaila. What's with the two Yuds? He says Kabbalah is very simple. We know that Havaya. Havaya could sometimes be lofty. It doesn't penetrate into the world. It transcends. Adni Shem Hashem, Malchus, that's where it connects into the world. So when we say we want Hashem's refuah, it's not just from, you want to go to the source, Havaya. But you need the source to come into this world. So you need Adni. So you need both. You need Shiluv, Havaya, Ba'adni. You need Soiva, V'amamala. You need both together. So therefore you have the Yud of Yud Kei Vav Kei, the beginning, and Adni ends with a Yud, so you have the Yud of that, Yud and Yud, and that's why you have two Yudin in Iyar, because Ani Hashem Refecha is that we tap into the bracha at the highest source, but we bring it down into the world, into this place. And the Rebbe is referencing this, so you have two explanations. One is ignore the second Yud because you don't pronounce it. Another one is, no, you have it. One Yud represents Havaya, the second one represents Adni. So the Rebbe referred to us in the previous order to Kedoshim Mem Dalid. So the Rebbe in this Sikh, Kedoshim Mem Dalid, actually says something original about the printing. Look at the second paragraph. V'lachem asinu b'chama v'kama chumashim v'sidurim shashaker eloi rasu lahatzis Hashem Havaya hitvisu shnei Yudin. Yud Rishon is keneged aschal Hashem Havaya. The Yud Hasheni is keneged asiyum d'shem Adni Hakri. In other words, the Rebbe basically is saying in the Sikha that Havaya and Adni are very much connected. V'haraya, we read Havaya as Adni. That represents, again, the same idea of taking the highest level and bringing it down into the lowest level. And so therefore, building on what the Munkacher did, the Rebbe suggests that in the Siddur, when you have two Yuds, the first Yud is representing Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the last Yud is representing Adni. So that works as an explanation, but it couldn't have worked as an explanation if you go back in time. Because if you go back in time, you have three Yuds. Or if you go back in time, you have two Yuds plus another thing. But now that we have just two Yuds, you can suggest that this is what it is. This is what it represents. Shiluv Havaya Ba'adni. So if you wanted to answer the question simple, because you asked today, what is a two Yuds in a Siddur doing? You could cut out this whole thing and you just say the first Yud, Havaya, second one, Adni, first how it's written in an original, second one how we pronounce it, and Siddur speaks about it, and so that's why we have the Yud and the Yud. What's with the Nikud on the bottom? It's one is a Shva and one is a Kama. So the Pashtus, I didn't look this up at all, but I'm just going to throw it in. It looks like that's because the Nikud for Yud Kei Vav Kei is a Kama, is a Shva under the Yud, and a Kamat's under the Vav. And there's also a piece on the top. So we forgot about the piece on the top, and we just kept the two bottom Nakudas under the Yud. So that's why we have the Yeh, and then we have the Yah, representing those two Nakudas. Anyway, so this was something that I've been working on for the last few weeks, and it definitely connects to where we're holding, and we're in terms of Chedesh Iyar. What? I said